Friends, unfortunately the modern world is littered with cliches, which, unfortunately, do not allow swelling your personal opinion. After all, we have long been accustomed to thinking that dressing modestly, a person is certainly not regarded by others as a successful businessman. Although it often happens that secretive people, sooner or later, make the whole world wonder. Today I will tell you the story of the most famous vagrant whose riches were learned only after his death. Kurt Jagerman was born into a dysfunctional family in a town in Sweden. But be that as it may, but during the lessons, he absorbed every phrase he heard from the wise teachers. While the weekend opposite was darkened by useless wandering through the streets alone, the 45 minutes of the lesson that were available to each child, Kurt perceived it as a breath of life, giving moisture on a dry day, paying particular attention to technical sciences. After all, he loved numbers and formulas so much. In general, 9 classes of training at school were completed. But by that time, the problems in the family were growing. And realizing this, the 16-year-old youth made a decision to change everything as soon as possible. After school, he dropped out and left home in search of a better life. So from a promising student, he descended the social ladder. And soon he became a homeless vagabond, in the absence of money and simple shelter over his head. Jagerman collected empty beer cans, later receiving a similar nickname, Kurt Tin Can. Outwardly, he was no different from other Swedish vagrants, becoming even more withdrawn and unsociable. Having met him, many of us would probably be horrified. A stooped man, whose clothes are what you can find in the trash cans, and his diet consisted of scraps and cheap fast food. The terrible everyday life of a man went on one after another, in total, stretching as much as 40 years. And probably each of you has a more than understandable question. And why is this story tempting? But to the surprise of many, she is made by an interesting fact that no one suspected of who was familiar with this strange man. The hero of our story moved along the same route every day, bypassing all garbage dumps and backyards of establishments, changing the collected at the point of receipt of raw materials. And unlike hundreds of similar vagabonds, Kurt was not at all interested in alcohol or other bad habits. Having received the first money in his life, he went to the free library, where before closing I read economic and analytical newspapers. So day after day he did the same thing, handing over containers and coming to the library in search of the necessary literature. It was from her that he drew all the stock news and data, allowing you to always be aware of what is happening on the securities market. And after a while, Jagerman was well versed in finance. And he even took his first step, buying himself shares for a few dollars. Of course, relatives and small acquaintances who did not wave their hands at him could not even imagine what he invests, all the money from collecting cans and glass containers, into securities and gold, buying up shares sometimes for the price of $1. The man always tried to do everything quickly and not noticeably. Since seeing a tramp in a bank branch, they tried to drive him away. All those with whom they had to share the dilapidated shelter, most of all thought about personal gain. And when the conflict for a piece of bread or a torn sweater turned into a mass sprawl, Kurt instantly disappeared from sight, trying to avoid contact as much as possible with that world. He was by no means arrogant. After all, well aware of his status, Kurt never took offense at the reaction of passers-by, which bypassed him. Never in his life did he ask for a penny from the residents of his city and earn money himself. Already accustomed to my way of life, the man no longer even thought of changing something, and continuing to receive funds for investment from the exchange of collected waste. Looking ahead, I want to say that Kurt was in no hurry to buy himself a new house or spend his earnings on clothes. It was not the desire to get rich that possessed him. After all, it was interesting for him to simply dispose of his knowledge and finances. And it will be hard to believe it, but it was the most ascetic life that brought him pleasure, without telling anyone about their wealth. By the age of 60, Kurt had a fabulous $1.5 million on his account. Most of the amount was kept as securities, and the rest was hidden in a Swiss bank, in the form of 124 gold bars. It was obvious that the devil was wandering the cold streets endlessly, and eating lousy scraps. No one will live long. So maintaining a similar lifestyle, the man ended up in the hospital. Doctors diagnosed a heart attack. A couple of months later, Kurt died in a hospital room. During that short time, being in the hospital, the only person who visited him, there was a double brother. Of course, he had no idea about the money of the homeless Kurt, And when my brother didn't, the latter was shocked. After all, it was to him that the tramp left all the inheritance. Other relatives showed no interest in homeless Kurt during his lifetime, and they even made fun of his cousin who visited him. Kurt never envied anyone and never bought anything. But he had a really bright head on his shoulders, and he was very smart, the man later said. Before his death, he left a will drawn up in accordance with all the rules. The very fact of the presence of which greatly surprised his relatives. But its content revealed the scale of the beggar's secret wealth. It shocked everyone even more. Exactly at that moment, as it were, the tramp is buried. All of a sudden they decided to encroach on a sudden inheritance. And his 92-year-old uncle was the main pretender. He stated that the late nephew was not himself, and therefore he could not make a will in his right mind and solid memory. And no matter how sad it is, according to Swedish law, even Dagerman's uncle, his age was apparently drawing to a close. He really had the rights to such a claim. After learning about this scandal, the Swedish press exploded with headlines in this spirit: "Why drag a beggarly life and save money so that others can use it later?" As a result, the hearing on the case seemed to be close to people lasted 4 months. And how they ended is unknown. The result of the meeting was not announced. But they say that all parties were satisfied. For a long time, the Swedish press was full of headlines about the amazing story of a man whom no one knew. There is no doubt that the last thing Kurt Dagerman would want is in his lifetime. There was so much attention to his person. With a unique mindset, he could have a good job and a happy family. But all hopes, if once they visited his head, disappeared at a very young age. It's hard to talk about whether the world needs such geniuses. But there is no doubt that they certainly have the right to make their own choices. Friends, how do you personally feel about the choice of a hobo millionaire? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments. But for today, that's probably all. Rate the video, and see you soon. Until